Okay, we'll start with James and the Giant Pit. This is a story of a Hollywood icon's connection to the Credit River Valley and the Niagara Escarpment. I guess we're talking about James Cameron. He's the director of three of the four largest movies of all time. You know him as well as director of Terminator, The Abyss, True Lies, Aliens, as well as the Avatar movies. You might know him from his environmentalism. He's a very avid vegan, and he owns a very sizable ranch in New Zealand, which is very organic farming and those sorts of things, as well as another couple of farms throughout the world. You might know him from his exploration, as he's one of the only one of the two people to go to the bottom of the Marinara Trench, and he's gone down and filmed Titanic, and his exploration is renowned, I guess, when it comes to filmmaking, deep sea. You might know him from his special effects company, which is Lightstorm Entertainment. They're a very, very large special effects company now, as they do a lot of work for Disney when they're making um, all the movies that he makes. I know him because he named a character in Titanic, Calvin Hockley, and that's Caledon is the town that we grew up in, and Hockley is a valley that's located next to Caledon. So, what is the Cameron connection to Caledon? So, James Cameron, the director, was born in 1954 in Kapuskasing to Philip and Shirley. His paternal great 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 grandfather, John Cameron, immigrated from Scotland in 1825. James would spend summers on this grandfather's farm during all of his youth. His mother and father were both raised in the same town, same village, and were high school sweethearts and were married for well over 70 years. When James Cameron was five, his family moved from Kapuskasing to Niagara Falls. And again, when he was about 17, 18, his family moved from the Niagara area to Southern California. In his biography, The Futurist, which spans his kind of life, the author interviews his parents, and Philip says Cameron's great 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 grandfather was a school teacher, and that he migrated from Scotland, and that he was a bit of a free thinker, and that he didn't like the king. This kind of information passed down through many, many generations. It was obviously a very important story, and that's primarily because the Camerons were pretty avid Jacobites, and Jacobites were people that supported the Stuart line of the throne, and definitely in 1820s, there was a rebel uprising in Scotland, and there was kind of a great sweeping away of kind of the troublesome kind of people. So it looks like the Camerons were part of that. Later, about 10, 15 years later, you'll see the Upper Canada Rebellion, and a lot of those followed the preachings, I guess, of William Lyon Mackenzie, who again was linked in the clan wise to the Camerons. Just to take a look at the John Cameron's family tree, you can see where it kind of goes down to Duncan and George, and then to John and Philip, and then to James Cameron. Um, these would have made the Camerons some of North America's earliest settlers. When you're coming over in the 1820s, uh, you know, where I kind of found out was, the area that kind of reside in is a beautiful area, and it's a very gorgeous area, very tough to farm area. However, it's a gorgeous area, made possible by the Niagara Escarpment and the glaciers that kind of came over this area about 10, 15,000 years ago. So to save this area, I decided to create a national petition to make it a national park. So looking at, who would be a very good spokesperson for this, I thought of James Cameron due to his environmentalism and is somewhat linked to the area. So when looking at that link to the, I did find out that as per the Cameron farmstead that James grew up on his youth is now set to become a massive quarry in the middle of a national park that I would like to create. So, with that information, I looked at it from a whole new light that maybe the land in the area does mean quite something to Cameron. Kind of got me thinking because if you're going to name the villain in your movie after your heritage and your home, why wouldn't you necessarily do it with the hero as well? Um, so I looked at Jack Dawson's biography, and it pretty much matches up with James Cameron's fictional biography of him during his youth, as a young man growing up fishing and spending time outside, and then at 17 moving to Southern California, where he would draw both of them would draw portraits of people, to where into the 20, into their early 20s, where then they kind of set off on these big adventures, which mimics very much Jim Cameron's actual life. So a lot of people though assume, or at least in this case, when that you're making the movie Titanic, there was an actual passenger on the Titanic. I believe his name was Jeffrey or George or something like that. Dawson had no relation to the movie itself, but a million people a year go and lay roses on this guy's grave in Halifax. So I decided, well, possibly is there a chance that there is an actual Jack Dawson? And when I looked in the cemetery, in the Cameron family cemetery, buried somewhere there is a John Graham Dawson, or a John Dawson, which would have been Jack Dawson's real name. He would have lived during this kind of Upper Canada Rebellion time, and actually ended up being was a neighbor of the Camerons, very close, a couple of fields over kind of thing, but was a neighbor of the Camerons. Uh, who was John Dawson? Well, he was the fifth son of an Irish peer. Um, John Cameron actually was the same. He was about the fourth or fifth son of a landowner in Scotland. And along, back in history, those times, only the first son would kind of inherit things, so all the rest of the kids would have to kind of go off and find their own way. Actually, John Dawson's wife was of the Hockley family, and his son actually would go on to fight in the U.S. Civil War. Has a memorial for him down in Michigan. So probably, and knowing that his father was John Dawson's father was a noted anti-unionist at the time, he was probably a badass when it came to the Upper Canada Rebellion. So there's maybe a good story to behind who John Dawson was and why maybe James Cameron may have taken this name. Who knows? For his stories, but as you can see, Jack Dawson grew up in Chippewa Falls. Chippewa is the town that James Cameron grew up in, and which is basically Niagara Falls. So there is a grave next to it by the Romantic family. So if you kind of look at them side by side, it does kind of read out almost as romantic Titanic. But anyways, just to kind of show some of that. So obviously I thought there must be some sort of link here. So I did go back and look and start researching about James Cameron. Now a couple of years ago, James Cameron released a book. It was called Tech Noir. It's the art of James Cameron. And back in 2010, and I'll talk about this in a minute, James Cameron put out an affidavit about where the creative, where the inspiration for a lot of his works came from. And he said, they came from these drawings that he made throughout his childhood and his youth. So, people kind of looked at them and said, oh, yeah, they're great. Actually, you're a fantastic artist. So they put them together in a book. Now, when I looked at the book, as I can kind of show you here, some people are going to interpret that as always drawing these biplane battles, that are going on in his imagination. Um, Maybe that's true, but if you take a look at that picture, that looks a lot like a river valley that would kind of be, similar to the farmstead. And those three biplanes are real biplanes because they belong to the World War One museum that's about 10 minutes south. As I can show you, they're the exact same biplanes. And I know this is because I've seen them flying overhead doing kind of dogfights back in the 1980s. I haven't seen them recently, but I remember, back in the 1980s, these dogfights and these planes would go over. So one can safely assume that James Cameron saw the same thing and is kind of was influenced to draw these. So in 1968, at age 14, James Cameron in his biography talks about how he went to 2001: A Space Odyssey, and very much became, immensely interested in becoming a director and becoming a filmmaker, and it really inspired. Um, so I posed the question in 1968. One of the things is, the Titanic. We look at it now, we know that it was discovered and movies were made and all that, but in 1968, the Titanic was gone. It was similar to Bigfoot. Nobody could find it, nobody knew where it was. So, is that something that maybe spurred James Cameron at that age to get really involved in this want to discover the deep sea? Because when he was about 14, he went to the ROM and saw all this deep sea equipment and would write back and forth. And a lot of that became the inspiration at age 17. He wrote The Abyss. The Abyss was really a story about a deep sea exploration, and would end up having some alien context to it. But that he came up with at age 17, and he was really looking at that bioluminescence of the ocean. That's kind of where he combined the bioluminescence of the oceans with the ideas of the science fiction that he's kind of coming up with. This is Bob Ballard, who obviously, famously found the Titanic. Um, at the same time, as soon as Bob Ballard found it, that's when James Cameron decided now was the right time to make The Abyss, part and parcel because his brother Mike Cameron helped develop all of the film hardware to film these movies. So although Jim Cameron is the one filming the deep sea things, his brother Mike Cameron was actually the one that invented all of the cameras for it. So, as part of the idea of kind of make The Abyss was to, in part, to prove that he could make Titanic as a movie. So, anyways, that's just another of this like to this story. So, when you take a look at where does all of James Cameron's ideas actually come from, and where he's on record saying he's on record legally saying that they all come to him via dreams, and that there's no universally accepted theory on where these dreams come from or how they're created, but that there's of some sort of your subconscious processing his information, and that the experience of his youth and that the area that he played within has may have manifested itself within these dreams. So there's which just brings it back to the farm, that's set now to become a quarry. So one of the things about James Cameron is he has had his fair share of plagiarism suits. Famously early on, The Terminator could be looked at as very heavily influenced by a lot of the works of Harlan Ellison, which forced an acknowledgement at the end of the movie. Uh, but really, it, kind of came to a head in 2010 where, in a 45-page declaration, Cameron has to detail where he came up with the concept of the film Aliens. He said he's been kicking around a lot of ideas since he was a child. He even used the Repetitious mining executive, played by Giovanni Ribisi, in earlier films like Aliens and things like that. An idea that he's, kind of had for many, many, many years. Cameron goes on to say that he's been pulling together elements of Avatar almost all his life, and that when he was in 11th grade, he did a pencil drawing of spring on planet Flora. Now, one thing to note about James Cameron, where we say he's in 11th grade, he actually skipped two grades. So that's when, he may be in 11th grade, but he's actually only 14 when he's kind of doing this. The idea of planet Flora, as you can see, there's Flora at the very, very top of that cenotaph next to the Titanic. And again, in his own words of the affidavit, he goes on to describe a lot of the influences being, basically serious films about Europeans immersing themselves in indigenous culture, such as Lawrence of Arabia and those sorts of things. But goes on to say he's described Avatar in numerous interviews as my most personal film, and by this I mean that the themes and ideas of the film are most personal to him of any I've done. That he's saying that in the very conceptual fabric of Avatar, it's innate to him, based on the systematically developed pattern of artwork, stories, interests, and activities, beginning with my elementary school days and stretching forward through high school, college, and my earliest career as a writer and filmmaker. Stating then that the ideas and the basis and the very structure of the biggest movies of all time really came to him during these very early times. So that's where, when you start now looking at it through that lens, how the forks of the credit really became inspiration for Pandora. First in the cemetery, there's many, many links, I guess, as you can say, thematic and almost creative, that you can pull as a parallel between movie and the thing. I think one of the biggest things in Avatar is what makes him most famous is those floating mountains, the Hallelujah Mountain. Almost to kind of take a look at it though. If you're familiar with the area, the Niagara Escarpment goes over the horizon many, many times, so it can kind of give that element to floating mountaintops. As well, there's the indigenous legends that go on around what's called the Devil's Pulpit, which is these very uh, 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 same sort of rock spires that are seen throughout Avatar. These big rocky kind of valleys and even the hills itself next to the farm are kind of often dubbed as the magnetic hills because there's an optical illusion that gives off that impression that it is actually pulling you up the hill. But it is very famous for being a magnetic hill, which is the properties that give James Cameron's Hallelujah Mountains those floating abilities. If you take a look at, the fact that he's using it as a Pocahontas story and kind of going on that, it's actually, you can look back and say, well, it's almost a story of his own family as they came to Upper Canada in the late, 1820s. And really, they were the ones that displaced the indigenous off the land. So, but there would be that very strong possibility that they were engaged or at least supported that Upper Canada Rebellion I guess, ideal at that time. And as we can see, their family stories have been handed down, as shown in his biography to his father, from generation to generation to generation. Um, when you start looking at that, I mean, you do start kind of pulling in different elements from the area as well. I mean, one of the things that is all throughout James Cameron's youth is that he's lived in areas where the Anishinaabe, kind of reside and is their territorial lands. If you take a look at a lot of the indigenous mythology that James Cameron would have at least learned about in the curriculum of school in the 60s. He was from where an area of where the Chippewa are from, the Mississauga were obviously where his family's farm were, and the you're getting up into the Nipissing as well, and different areas of this clan culture that he would have been aware of and pulled from. One of the speaking back to that, it was an area that they did farm that did belong to the Mississauga of Credit prior to, and their farming of that land is the thing that kind of displaced them. Now, when you go back and look at some of the similarities between the indigenous culture of Southern Ontario and the creatures, I guess you could say, of Avatar, there's a lot of thematic and stylistic similarities that you can pull. Especially being with Thunderbird inspiration and those sorts of things. Because when you do look at a lot of the art and do look at a lot of the thematic idea, there's a lot of a lot of similarities that you can pull from the Niagara Escarpment, river valleys to that of Pandora, which ties us back to the quarry. So that is, the land, the farmstead itself was sold to a golf course for development in the 1990s. Cameron began writing Avatar in 1995. Avatar, simply put, is the story of a pristine alien world being turned into a quarry by humans. The reality is the owners of the land are the Humanic family, and the pristine land is about to be turned into a quarry, much the same way that it happens in the movie.